So here we are. This is our second community update related to the CV-SNMP. We were with you a little over a year ago, maybe 15 months ago. So a lot of work has been conducted since then, and that's what we're here to present today. And doing the presenting will be Andy Malone with West Yost Associates. Carolina Sanchez has done a lot of work on this as well, so she's here with us today and also can help answer questions. Behind Caro is Zoe Rodriguez Del Rey. She's part of the steering committee, and we have Sarah, also part of the steering committee. Who else am I missing part of the steering committee for this project in the room? Two steering committee members. Okay, excellent. So we've got a lot of folks here that can help answer questions throughout the morning. We are going to do a very high level fly through of the basics of the CV-SNMP, like 5 minutes rapid fire. And then we are going to give you an overview of technical memorandums 1, 2, and 4. So that's work that's been done over the last year plus. And then we'll pause for questions. And then the balance of the time, which might be more about half of the presentation, 2/3 of the presentation, is focused on technical memorandum or TM number 3, draft management zones and methods to characterize beneficial use protection. So that's where we really wanted to spend the bulk of our time today. We think you'll be interested in that. And we'll also, before we close out, let you know what's coming up next, and then show you ways to follow along if you're interested to stay engaged with us. And we'll have some time at the end there too for open discussion. But again, Q&A along the way. Andy likes it interactive. We also have a quick poll. I think that this is running. We were having some Wi-Fi issues this morning, but if you're interested to let us know what you're representing, what your work represents, which category best fits you, you can play along with us with the Slido poll. You can do it in the room if you want. You can scan the QR code and it should pull up the poll for you. It's helpful to know who's tracking along and who we should continue to engage. So if you're part of the ag industry, golf, if you're residents, if you're a commercial or industrial water user, tribal government or tribal organization, an NGO, if you work for a government agency, research or academia, or another interested party. And you can select all that apply. I can't see it because my computer would not log in to the security settings of the boardroom. But can you see it on your computer, Carol? Are you pulling it up? I see some folks in the room are doing it with us. I can see folks are still giving it a try, so we'll just give them another minute or two. I know we have golf industry representatives in the room. I know we have government agency representatives in the room. I'm not quite sure who's joining us on Zoom yet. Cool. I'm gonna look at this later. Okay, without further ado, I would like to invite Andy Malone up to give us an overview of the CV-SNMP. And we're gonna start with a quick review of the what, who, how, when, and why.
Thank you, Megan. Good morning, everyone. Again, my name's Andy Malone. I'm a geologist with West Yost Associates. I've worked on salt and nutrient management planning in other portions of the state, and I'm leading the technical team here at West Yost in the development of this salt and nutrient management plan. So happy to be here. I was here the last workshop, and you'll see me again in subsequent workshops as well, making presentations. I'm going to skip to this slide here, which describes the what and why are we here in the first place. Well, really, this relates to the state's recycled water policy, which encourages the use of recycled water across the state for obvious reasons. We live in an arid environment, and recycled water is an extremely important component of water supplies across the state. But it also requires the development and implementation of these salt and nutrient management plans, or SNMPs, the way we abbreviate them, so that it's recognizing that recycled water and other water supplies are a little bit higher in the salinity concentrations have potential to adversely impact the groundwater supplies. So to develop management plans to manage the groundwater basins so that the beneficial uses of the groundwater basins stay protected. We have a link to the recycled water policy on our website, but it's on the state board's website as well. If you're so inclined to get in there and dig into some of the policy that is behind salt and nutrient management planning. One really important reason why we are developing such a management plan in the Coachella Valley is that the Coachella Valley's economy is intricately tied to water. The ability to use recycled water, which again is increasingly important as part of the water supply portfolio for the water purveyors in the valley. The ability to use Colorado River water. Colorado River water is an extremely important part of the water supply that makes the Coachella Valley sustainable with regard to groundwater use. So extremely important to preserve the ability to continue to use Colorado River water in the basin. This management plan may also affect the operations and hence the cost of managing and treating water and wastewater across the valley, and hence also is going to affect the water rates. So this management plan is important with regard to operations and costs, and ultimately the water rates that that water rate payers are paying. We want this plan to recognize the diversity in the valley. This valley is diverse in the way it uses groundwater. So all the beneficial uses, the agriculture, the golf, the municipal water uses across the basin. It's also very diverse socioeconomically. So this plan should recognize that diversity and be constructed in a way that makes sense for the entire community. Also wanting to preserve the affordable use of water. So that's going to be an important component of our plan as well, is recognizing the associated costs with managing salts and nutrients and doing this in the most efficient way possible. And then, of course, to protect groundwater quality for future generations. Sustainability is the name of the game. There's a whole nother process under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act that is being implemented, and water quality is a part of that as well. So the groundwater sustainability plans that are being constructed in and implemented in the valley are going to leverage the work that we do here on the water quality side. I'm not going to go into great detail on this slide here, but there are a number of different factions of people that are working on this. The steering committee, we abbreviate it with SC, oftentimes in our technical memoranda and just in our speak. The steering committee is composed of representatives of all the water and wastewater agencies that are funding this effort. So that's one important component. There's a technical advisory committee that consists of technical experts, not only that are working in the valley here, but that we have independent consultants that are working in the Central Valley on similar issues that are also participating on this committee and providing advice to the technical team. And the technical team is composed of scientists here at West Yost. We also have Megan, who is here on the stakeholder outreach side of things, and then we've got a policy and law expert too, Tess Dunham, that is helping us out on that side of things. Then we also have the public stakeholders and the tribes, and again, this a real important part of the development of these plans is doing the public outreach and getting input and feedback from the public, since they're the ones that are going to be most impacted by the development and implementation of this plan. We developed a work plan. The work plan is also on our website. It is a good place to start if you're trying to familiarize yourself with this effort. The work plan spells out the technical steps. This is a multi-year process. It spells out all the technical steps that we're going through in a very logical fashion. This was also developed in a stakeholder environment with these same parties here involved, and ultimately was reviewed by the regional board and approved by the regional board. So we've got some buy-in from the regulators on the work that is going to be done. We want to continue to embrace the regulators and the public in the implementation of this work plan all the way through. But everyone was involved in the initial steps to develop this work plan. The work plan is being conducted by the technical team under the guidance of the steering committee and the TAC, which stands for Technical Advisory Committee. And we have a process by which each step of the way, we are publishing the results of our work and putting it out for review by the steering committee, the TAC, and ultimately the public and the regional board. And we'll be working our way step by step through the development of this management plan. This here doesn't outline all the technical steps, but it brings you through generally how we're approaching our technical approach to completing this work. Our first two efforts were characterizing where salts and nutrients are being loaded across the basin to the groundwater basin. So that was our technical memorandum number one. The next step was to characterize what groundwater quality looks like today across the basin, both spatially and depth specifically, with regard to TDS concentrations, which stands for total dissolved solids. That's an indication of the total salinity content of the groundwater, as well as nitrogen. And the nitrogen species that we're most focused on is nitrate nitrogen. So we went through great efforts to characterize what water quality looks like in the basin today. That was technical memorandum number two. The next step, the second box here, is to identify appropriate concentrations in groundwater to protect water quality and its beneficial uses. And that's our current effort right now. We're calling that technical memorandum number three. And there we're delineating logical portions of the basin that can be managed effectively for groundwater quality. We're identifying what the beneficial uses are and what the beneficial use thresholds are for TDS and nitrate in these areas. And so that's the current work that we're going through, and I'll be diving into that in more detail in this presentation. The third box here is evaluate the impact of current water supply plans and salt and nutrient management scenarios. What we're doing there is we are constructing computer simulation models of how TDS and nitrate are loaded to the basin, how that affects the concentrations of TDS and nitrate in the groundwater basin spatially across the whole basin and depth specifically. So this is a major technical task to develop these models, validate them so that we have some confidence that these computer simulation models work and can simulate salt nutrient loading and the resultant concentrations in the groundwater basin, so that then we can use them as projection tools to predict the future under the current water supply plans and wastewater disposal plans of the water and wastewater agencies in the basin. So once we're able to do that and predict the future, we can see where salt and nutrient management strategies are needed, when they're needed, where they're needed, so that we can develop a management plan that is efficient and cost effective and achieves the objective of protecting the beneficial uses in the basin. So this modeling task is extremely important. This will be a first generation model that we expect to be improved over time with the use of the monitoring data that is being collected out there as well as part of this plan. So that's the third box here. The last box is to collectively take all these technical memoranda that we've developed and compile them into one plan that will be used to recommend this plan to the regional board. The regional board may take this plan and incorporate certain parts of it into its main regulatory document that's called the Basin Plan, where they update their basin plan periodically, and they can use this salt nutrient management plan as the basis for an update to their main regulatory document, the Basin Plan. That's the big picture there. Our technical review process is pretty thorough and goes through multiple steps of technical review as we're working our way through each one of these steps in the work plan. Is that first we do our work and we prepare a draft. I think we call it an administrative draft technical memorandum, but it goes through review of our steering committee first. We receive feedback from the steering committee. We might update our technical memorandum at that point in time. And then we schedule a meeting with the technical advisory committee. We typically give our technical memorandum to the TAC early. They get a chance to review it, and then we have a meeting, and then we ask for comments from them. The regional board is invited to these technical advisory committee meetings. They are not open to the public, but the regional board is invited to listen in and ask questions at that stage. Based on the feedback we get back from the TAC, we'll update that technical memorandum again, and then it will be ready for release for the public review. And then we accept public comments and then finalize that technical memorandum based on the public comments. That's generally how it goes. It takes some time to run such a stakeholder process, but we found that this is a highly effective process to go through to not only get technical feedback from the people that are funding this process, as well as the public and the tribes. Hence, this implementation of this work plan to develop the salt nutrient management plan is a multi-year process. These modeling tools, for example, take us a while to develop and convince ourselves that they are effective simulation tools, as well as the stakeholder process that we're going through. So this is a multi-year effort. We started in July 2022. We intend to be finished by March 2027. And this breaks down our scope of work by task. So you see 9 bars up here that span from 2022 to 2027. The first bar is to establish our stakeholder groups, but then each one of these subsequent tasks are numbered. And we have completed some, and we are in the process of completing others, and then there are future tasks. The yellow stars represent the major points in time when we will be having public input on each one of these future tasks. Again, you can get into the details of each one of these tasks in our work plan, as well as the technical memoranda that are published when each one of these tasks are completed. This gives you a status of where we're at right now. Our TM1, which was all about characterizing the loading of TDS and nitrate to the basin, where that occurs, how that occurs, that's already been completed. Our TM2, the same thing, has already been completed. That's our characterization of TDS and nitrate concentrations across the basin and depth specifically across the basin. Our TM4, we fast forwarded because that was a modeling task that didn't rely on prior tasks to be done. So we were attempting to get ahead of the game on our modeling. And TM4 talks about our technical approach to developing these computer simulation modeling tools. So we first went through a process of describing how we're going to do it and getting technical buy-in from the TAC and the regional board on how we're going to go about doing this computer simulation modeling before we actually implement and do it, which is task 5, which is constructing those forecasting tools and testing them out, and then running them off into the future to predict the future of water quality in the valley. TM3, I skipped over. We're 75% complete with that, and we're going to be reporting to you on some of our progress here today. And this is where we're defining our management units within the larger groundwater basin and proposing those. And we're proposing a method to compute what we call ambient water quality. We're looking at the beneficial uses and the beneficial uses thresholds. So I'll get into a lot of that here later in the presentation, but we're about 75% complete through that task. And then the actual forecasting in TM6, and then doing a cost analysis in TM7, those have not been started yet. So today's focus, going to give you the high-level summary of what we've published to date on TMs 1, 2, and 4, and then dig into a little bit more detail on TM3 on the management zones and the beneficial uses and ambient water quality. I'm not going to get in here and read each one of these definitions. I think you had a handout that, okay, so describe some of these definitions, hopefully add some time to read through it. But we are going to be discussing these groundwater management zones, or these logical hydrologic units that will be effective for managing TDS loading and the TDS nitrogen concentrations in groundwater. Ambient water quality, or AWQ, that is a method by which we take data and we evaluate that data within a management zone. We come up with a single number to be generally representative of the TDS and nitrate concentrations within that management zone. And then a water quality objective. We're not going to be talking a lot about that today, but that is where we're going. We want to recommend TDS water quality objectives at the end of this effort for the regional board to incorporate into its basin plan. That's one of our main objectives, is to come up with those recommendations for the regional board's consideration. Right now, the regional board does not have numeric TDS objectives in its basin plan. It does have nitrate nitrogen objectives for the basin, which are based on the maximum contaminant level of 10 milligrams per liter for nitrate nitrogen. And then this concept of assimilative capacity as well, where we're comparing water quality objectives to the ambient water quality, those first two. But we won't get too much into that today either. Good to know those definitions, though. Okay, so TM1, we had a number of objectives. We really wanted to understand where and how TDS and nitrogen were being loaded to the basin. And then we could use that information to help us delineate appropriate management zones in the valley. And then, of course, that loading information can be very important input data to our water quality model simulation tools. This is an example of one map that we included in this technical memorandum number 1, which is color coded. You see the entire groundwater basin here, separated into its subbasins that are outlined in green. But all the color shading that you see on this map represents different places where TDS and nitrogen are being loaded to the groundwater basin. We've got things like wastewater percolation ponds, the major groundwater replenishment facilities where imported water is being recharged, artificially recharged to the groundwater basin, so we can support groundwater levels and sustainably use the groundwater basin. We got areas where recycled water is being used for outdoor irrigation. We have areas where just water is being pumped out of the groundwater basin and being applied to the ground surface for agricultural irrigation, golf course irrigation, for municipal landscape irrigation. Those are color coded by blue to represent more of the municipal overlying land uses and golf course overlying land uses, and then in green in the eastern part of the valley where it's mostly agricultural overlying land uses. Wherever you have water that's being applied to the ground surface, the plants are using up a good portion of that water, but oftentimes over irrigation, you'll have return flows that will be a more highly concentrated water than what was applied. And so that can migrate back to the aquifer system and add salts and nutrients to the aquifer system. Typically in groundwater basins, this is a big source of salt and nutrient loading and needs to be understood, needs to be simulated with our simulation models. So it's a really important part of the dynamics of salt and nutrient loading in the basin. And so we describe that in this technical memorandum too. So that's your high level overview of what's included in technical memorandum number 1. Technical memorandum number 2 was about characterizing groundwater quality. Again, I talked about that here already. This is going to be also important information to delineating our management zones, is understanding both spatially and depth specifically what our concentrations are like out there. For our modeling, it's also very important. If we're going to be doing future modeling, we need an initial condition to start our model from. And so understanding current groundwater quality is really important. That becomes input data to our models, and then we use our loading data and our assumptions for loading data out into the future that then we can run these computer simulation tools and predict how water quality may change in the future under our water and wastewater plans. Okay, there's some other objectives here that I won't dive into in great detail here, but it's also just important to understand current water quality for these reasons as well. An example of one, we've got many of these maps in this technical memorandum, but what we're showing here on this map on the left-hand side is the actual measured data that we use to characterize TDS concentrations in this example here. So the color coding of the dots, each dot represents a well where we had some data on TDS concentrations. And the red dots represent higher concentrations all the way down to the blue dots, which represent very low concentrations of total dissolved solids. So that was the root data that we used. And then we used interpolation tools to generate a rasterized surface of groundwater quality across the entire basin. We need to understand, or at least have an estimate of what groundwater quality is like across the entire basin for input to the computer simulation models. So that is one of the reasons why we take the point data from the wells and then interpolate into a rasterized surface of water quality. We have a monitoring program, as I told you earlier here, that includes a subset of the wells that you're seeing up here. And that monitoring program is being improved over time, but we will use the results of the monitoring program going off into the future to create similar maps that can be compared to each other, that can be used to assess change detection. So where are concentrations increasing or decreasing over time? this is going to be the technical strategy to develop those visual graphics and be able to demonstrate going forward how water quality is changing under our plans. Technical memorandum number 4, our whole technical approach to forecasting TDS and nitrate concentrations in groundwater. We set out to develop the most efficient approach as possible. Modeling is highly technical, can sometimes be very expensive, but they're also very, very effective and necessary tools in groundwater management planning in general. So we described in this memo our methods for developing these tools. What we are doing is we are using the 2 groundwater flow models. They don't simulate water quality. They simulate recharge and groundwater flow and groundwater discharge and pumping. They simulate all those things. And the main model output is how water levels are changing in the aquifer, how groundwater is flowing, that's the type of information you get out of groundwater flow models. There are 2 main models that have been constructed and updated and improved over time to support the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act compliance. And that is in the so-called Mission Creek subbasin, which is outlined in black. And then there's a little bit of overlap with the outline in red, which is the Indio subbasin. And so different alternative GSPs have been developed for using these models in both these areas. And what we intend to do is use these models for the groundwater flow simulation and then build our water quality simulation tools on top of these groundwater flow models. And that's how we intend to simulate TDS and nitrate loading and concentrations in groundwater over time. You see the little zoomed in square on the upper right, and that's showing you the resolution of the model grid. So we will have predictions of TDS and nitrate concentrations by model cell, as well as by model layer. These are 4-layer models, so we will understand depth specifically. Well, at least we'll have projections depth specifically of what TDS and nitrate concentrations in the groundwater basin are expected to be in the future. So with that, I want to pause and take any questions. That's your high-level overview of what's been done so far. But if there's any questions either in the room or online, we welcome that at this point in time.
I'm gonna run you a mic. Oh, okay. That way the folks on Zoom. Oh, okay.
Just on that one slide where you had the septic areas, I was just wondering how you got that information, the potential septic areas.
I believe we got that information from Coachella Valley Water District, and Zoe might have more info on that.
Response.
So Andy, it's actually a mixture because realize there's several agencies that span the study area of the SNMP, but within the CBWD area, again, these are areas that have been identified as potentially having septic systems, and that's a layer that came from an engineering document. I believe the sanitation master plan, and that's available within our GIS.
And typically these are areas where there's some development there. They've got they have to dispose of their wastewater in some way, but they're not sewered. Yeah. Any other questions?
Ready to move to the next section.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about TM3 now and this whole concept of groundwater management zones. We have one large basin, but what we intend to do here is effectively divide this larger unit into smaller, more manageable units that are subdivided according to their conditions and their needs. And so what we do is we use a lot of that information that we've already developed on loading, on our understanding of the hydrogeology of the basin, and on what water quality looks like to help us propose management zones. So these are some of our objectives for management zone delineation. We will be looking to define certain areas and depths for management zones. We want to describe the beneficial uses of groundwater in each one of these management zones. That can change spatially across the valley. And we want to describe the beneficial use thresholds for TDS and nitrate concentrations specifically in each one of these management zones. And then in order to characterize the reasonable protection of beneficial uses, at least currently here, we need to estimate TDS and nitrate concentrations in these management zones. So we've gone about doing that spatially, but now develop a method to come up with one single number for the management zone that is generally representative of the water quality conditions in that management zone. And then we can compare that ambient water quality estimate to the beneficial use threshold to at least have some sense initially of, is the beneficial use protected in this management zone or is it not? So we do have a definition for you on beneficial use thresholds. These are specific concentrations above which the beneficial use becomes impaired. So, so that there's a lot of talk in this TM about these beneficial use thresholds. They are different from a water quality objective in the basin plan, in that they are specific to a specific beneficial use. There may be multiple beneficial uses in a groundwater management zone that has a water quality objective. So these beneficial use thresholds are really specific to a beneficial use. They are specific to the point of beneficial use too. So for drinking water, we want that water to be of TDS and nitrogen concentrations below that beneficial use threshold at the tap, whereas a water quality objective applies to the groundwater unit itself. And then lastly, these beneficial use thresholds are not specifically called out in the basin plan. These are all the various considerations that go into developing our management zones. Like I said, the hydrogeology, the current understanding of where groundwater recharge is occurring, how groundwater flows and where it discharges. That's important information. Where the TDS and nitrate is being loaded to the basin, and how it's transported through the basin. What groundwater quality looks like currently in the groundwater basin. That's an important component to important consideration. What the beneficial uses are of groundwater. We took a look at that. And then lastly, the location of hydrologically vulnerable areas as identified in the GAMMA database. That's basically looking at the permeability of the overlying sediments, and essentially our groundwater basin is pretty highly permeable everywhere. And so most of our groundwater basin is identified as hydrologically vulnerable. This is what we're proposing in this TM as a start. We're calling these draft groundwater management zones. We're going to propose something in this TM. We're going to learn more as we work our way through this work plan. Specifically, our groundwater quality modeling tasks, we're going to see the future of what we predict groundwater quality to change in the future. And that may cause us to change these draft delineations from what we're proposing here in this TM. But essentially, we're starting pretty big, where a lot of the alignments here and boundaries are along fault boundaries, geologic fault boundaries that slow down or inhibit the underground flow of groundwater. And so the hydrogeology has been used specifically here to subdivide this groundwater basin into its draft management zones along fault boundaries. So we have the Desert Hot Springs, which is located northeast of the San Andreas Fault and up against the Little San Bernardino Mountains. Not too many beneficial uses of groundwater in that management zone. It's typically very high in TDS concentrations, and it's warm water, probably from thermal upwelling of deeper groundwaters. But that's the Desert Hot Springs. The Mission Creek groundwater management zone is in that bluish color, sandwiched in between the Mission Creek Fault and the Banning Fault. The city of Desert Hot Springs exists in the northern part of that management zone. And then the larger Indio subbasin has been subdivided into 3 main units. The western side of it is the most upgradient side of it. So there's a lot of recharge that occurs in this area. This is where a lot of the municipal and golf course overlying land uses occur. And so that's the northern, most upgradient part of the Indio subbasin that we're calling the Indio West Groundwater Management Zone. About halfway down, it transitions into what we're calling the Indio East Groundwater Management Zone. The main overlying land uses there are golf course and agriculture, with some municipal supplies that are extracted from this portion of the aquifer system too. And so it's a more stratified hydrogeology, where we've got a more stratified shallow aquifer and then a deeper aquifer that is separated by a laterally continuous clay unit that stretches across that portion of the basin that effectively separates those 2 aquifer systems. And then there's a perched aquifer, which consists of maybe the upper 50 to 100 feet of sediments that is the crosshatched area. And this is largely drained. This is largely agricultural. There's agricultural drains that intercept the irrigation water and then convey it to the Salton Sea ultimately. But this is an area where we don't have too much monitoring data. We're drilling new wells and collecting more information on this perched aquifer, but it is typically very high in TDS concentrations and nitrate concentrations from what we know today. But we're separating that out separately. We don't think that has too many municipal or irrigation beneficial uses associated with it. And that is one of the main reasons why we culled that out separately. As far as beneficial use thresholds go, these can be a single number or expressed as a range here. So we've based this on some of the research we've done to identify the 3 main beneficial uses that are identified in the basin plan today: the municipal, the industrial, and the agricultural. You can see for municipal under domestic, this would be for drinking water, and this is based on the secondary MCLs in the water code that have a range between 500 to 1,000. And then for nitrate nitrogen, it's 10 milligrams per liter, and that's based on the primary MCL for drinking water. For outdoor irrigation and golf course irrigation, the beneficial use threshold for TDS is greater than 1,280 milligrams per liter. For industrial uses, it's 850 milligrams per liter. And then look at that range for agriculture. That is based on our understanding of all the various crops that are grown in the Coachella Valley. And each one of those crops has a different beneficial use threshold. And it's actually pretty interesting because they can further subdivide those beneficial use thresholds based on crop yield. And so, but we're looking here at the total range that we've researched in the literature and worked with some of the agricultural interests in the valley to come up with these beneficial use thresholds for agricultural land uses. Okay, we also took that groundwater quality characterization we did in our technical memorandum number 2, and we applied a volume weighted method to come up with what we're calling ambient water quality estimates for TDS and nitrate in each one of these 5 management zones. So this is based on actual data from around the 2010 time period to the current time period, right around 2019. We're looking at about 5-6 years worth of data. Is it 6 years? 5 years? Okay, so 5 years, two on the front side, 2 on the back side, and then the actual year there to come up with these ambient water quality estimates. And this is what we've come up with, and that we will be publishing in our draft memorandum for what we consider to be current ambient or historical ambient around the 2010 timeframe for these concentrations. Again, we can compare these concentrations to the beneficial use thresholds to do an initial assessment of beneficial use protection within each one of these management zones. And what we've determined is that for nitrate, this first bullet, for nitrate concentrations that they're less than all the beneficial use thresholds that apply for each groundwater management zone. For TDS concentrations in the Mission Creek, Indio West, and Indio East, that those ambient concentrations are less than the beneficial use thresholds that apply to each management zone. And then for the Desert Hot Springs, it's less than the beneficial use threshold for outdoor municipal use and existing agricultural uses, and within the range for industrial and nurseries. So these are some of our preliminary determinations for the draft management zones and our initial estimates of ambient water quality in comparison to the beneficial use thresholds. Early next year, we should have this technical memorandum out for release and a minimum 30-day public review period. So stay tuned for that. You will be notified. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of a preview of how we intend to use this information. This is going to be very conceptual at this point. But where do we go from here once we finish this task and then move into our modeling tasks? So this is in the work plan. So if you want to study this in greater detail, you can go into the work plan and review some of these graphics in detail. But I'm going to take a little bit of time here to explain what you're seeing. This is a time series chart. If you look at the bottom on the x-axis, it goes from 2010 to 2021. So it's a little look at the current and recent history, but then it's a model projection from that point forward. And again, this is hypothetical and conceptual at this point in time. It's going to start getting very real once we start developing and using the modeling tools. But this would be for one management zone. These 2 green dots that you see on the left-hand side at 2010 and at 2019 represent those ambient water quality estimates that would have been generated by our method to compute ambient water quality based on measured data. So you can see there, those two dots in this example, it's showing a little bit of an increase in TDS concentration from 2010 to 2019. The orange line that you see across the top, that is showing a higher TDS concentration. So I should have explained this, the y-axis is increasing TDS concentrations. But the beneficial use threshold, as represented by the orange line, represents that that TDS concentration above which the beneficial use becomes impaired. The green dashed line represents an example of a future model projection of TDS concentration under the water plans and the wastewater plans of all the parties in the basin. So what this example is showing is that right around the 2065 time period, what this model is projecting is that we are going to have TDS concentrations in this management zone that exceed the beneficial use threshold. That may be grounds for developing and ultimately implementing a salt management strategy to try to control salt nutrient loading and keep that green line below the beneficial use threshold. So let's say this is the actual result we get. Now we're going to be faced with a process by which, as a group, we start developing salt nutrient management strategy ideas and then using the models to test them out and their effectiveness at controlling salt nutrient concentrations in groundwater. So what we might see here, and when we move on to our next model scenario where we're testing out those strategies, that, okay, now our model's indicating that, that we are stabilizing TDS concentrations in this management zone well below the beneficial use threshold. And so this might be an example of a salt nutrient management strategy that could be considered for inclusion in the salt nutrient management plan. We would obviously go through the cost implications associated with the salt nutrient management strategy. We may run other scenarios, other strategies, compare their costs as well. But this is essentially where we're going, is a process by which we test out, well, first of all, we test out what we think the future might portend, and then, if needed, start to develop and test out salt nutrient management strategies with these computer simulation models. Any questions on that? So what's coming up next? Again, the draft and final TM3 on the management zones and our methods to compute ambient water quality, our identification of our beneficial uses and the beneficial use thresholds. So all that will be in TM3. And then we will be constructing these computer simulation models and running our first model simulation, which we're going to call our baseline scenario, which will be the current management plans in the SGMA compliance efforts that have been developed for the SGMA compliance efforts. So we'll be doing that first test and reporting those results in our technical memorandum number 5. You can share your comments at any point in time. We have methods for you to do that, either by submitting your comments to that email there or coming onto our website. I believe we have a place on our website that we can accept comments. We have an email listserv. If you're not on it, go to our website and you can request to be on the email listserv. We will be having future workshops, public workshops that I showed you on that one slide with all the various yellow stars on it. And you do have the opportunity to submit comments on our draft technical memoranda. At the end of this effort, there will be another bite at the apple when the full salt nutrient management plan is compiled and put together, it will also go through an extensive public review process as well. Think I'm done. And happy to take any questions, any further questions.
And this is just a reminder of our project website, which is CV-SNMP.com. Depending on what browser you're using to access the website, you could get an error code pop up and you just have to press the refresh button. It's very peculiar. We're not sure why it's doing that, but it'll take you right back to this homepage. And then on here, there's a resource at the second kind of center area at the top bar, public meetings. We actually have the recording from our introductory workshop up there that goes into more detail on the basics of the plan. And we'll also post the recording from this session up there as well, in addition to all of the supporting materials. And then under resources, that's where we have a whole really long list of resources that are used to inform development of the plan, but also where the draft and final technical memorandum are posted. So there's some good content on there for you. I just wanted to remind you that it's there. And with that, we've got plenty of time. Actually, we stopped right on time here. So we have time to chat if anyone has questions. I've got an eye on Zoom. I didn't see anything come through in the chat box yet, and no one's raised their hand, but we can let folks kind of sit with this information for a couple of seconds and see if we have any questions or comments in the room.
Thank you. Michael Placencia, Region 7 Water Board. A question regarding the slide where it shows the east and west. There you go. I'm just curious about the criteria that was used to delineate between Indio West and Indio East, with the exception of the perched subbasin.
Sure. So a couple different factors went into this decision. First of all, there is a shift in the overlying land uses to more agriculture as you move to the east. So that was considered. That was one consideration. Another consideration is the complexity of the hydrogeology changes. That in the east part of the basin, we have more of a laterally continuous clay layer that separates out the shallow aquifer from the deeper aquifer. Whereas in the east, it's more one continuous aquifer system. We do have layers in the groundwater flow models that delineate the layers, but there's no continuous aquitard that separates the shallow from the deep. There may be some water quality differences in the shallow and the deep, but there's no hydrogeologic barrier between the shallow and the deep. So the other consideration was hydrogeologic change from a more unstratified aquifer system in the west to a more stratified aquifer system in the east. So that was another reason for separating them there. Another one too, numerically, we stop at the very bottom end of the Mission Creek subbasin there. So all of the inflow from Mission Creek across the Banning Fault into the Indio subbasin would occur into the Indio West management zone and not into the Indio East management zone. So it was just another kind of minor decision, but numerically, when we report all these results, the outflow from Mission Creek will be 100% into the Indio West management zone there. And also it's where the bedrock kind of narrows there too. So from the bedrock narrows across to the point where Mission Creek kind of peters out and comes to a point there. So that was just a minor consideration. But the major considerations were a change in the overlying land uses and hence water uses, and the complexity of the underlying hydrogeology and how that changes there too.
Other questions in the room? Let me check on Zoom. Jared, you seen anything on Zoom? Nothing? Hands up? Okay. I mean, we're happy to hang out after we officially stop the recording and chat with you if you have any other feedback, questions, or comments. We're not going to keep you here, though. Last call.
Thank you for attending. Hope you found it useful.
We really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you for that careful walkthrough, Andy. That was very helpful. And we hope that you continue following along the process with us. Reach out to us at any time. This is the person who's answering the emails. So it is, Carolina answers the emails. It's a live person. I do the email updates. And so again, if you didn't catch the sign-in sheets on the back, and then I'll transcribe that into our email listserv, we'll let you know when TM number 3 is out and ready for review. That's coming early 2025. Thanks, everyone. Any other comments? Thank you.